Okay, so we're coming in now to part 2 of our discussion about the relationship of live events and the environment, and the responsibilities and actions that can be taken by event organisers and event suppliers to reduce the carbon impact of live events and help educate the people who are going to them. I think we talked about that a little bit last week. Last week we talked about standards and how really the sporting industry has probably led the way in terms of sort of persuading suppliers to get their ISO 14001 in place and things like that, whereas festival organisers have probably been not as proactive in that way. So in some ways the sporting events are leading kind of what they're doing there, but in other ways there are some absolutely kind of fantastic festivals who are blazing a trail with what they're doing and probably being more creative and more passionate throughout their event in the ethos they've got. So it's an interesting the crossover of what could be learned from each other.
It'd be nice for the festivals to especially review the new 14001 standard that came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and almost use that as a template and go through it and go, right, are we covering that? Are we looking at that? Is that something that, so communications, are senior management involved in the process of actually disseminating the message across to all of our suppliers of trying to reduce that impact and going through the standard, and almost it would help to tie it all in together to help have a uniformity across the whole of the UK.
Yeah, sure. Reflecting again on the industry manifesto survey of 47 festival organisers, festival organisers want clear information, a clear idea of standards. So some kind of approach in the festival industry to agreeing what we are working to collectively, and having resources to support that would be of benefit. Maybe
we could put together a kind of questions and answers. So using the 14001 standard and saying, right, if you can answer all these questions, so it would almost tie it in, so that then they can go, well, we actually adhere to that 14001 standard. They may not necessarily need to be certified against it, but they can say, we adhere to it.
Sure, I'd love to explore that with you, Will, especially because my reflecting on ISO 2012-1, which was the legacy of the Olympics, my concern with it was that it was more accessible in terms of cost and the sort of bureaucracy around it to much larger organisations. So it didn't suit the dynamic and often small organisations small to medium organisations that inhabit a large part of the independent festival sector. But also we were talking about the fact that in ISO 2012-1 there's a lack of meaningful continual improvement, so it can be a box-ticking exercise. I'm very encouraged by conversations we've had outside of this interview about how the culture around 14001 compels companies to actually make meaningful changes.
I guess the fact that I see companies changing, and I see there's such good buy-in from companies and trying to be more environmental. I remember getting shouted at by a client of mine because I was talking about how much money they could save, and she looked at me and went, this is the CEO of a large advertising agency, and went, it's not about that, Will. We want to do things because we want to reduce our impact. And it was lovely to hear, but I was a bit kind of taken aback. But there is that drive, and she is what is going on. But then are the sort of people that I'm talking to that want to become more environmental by pure virtue, am I talking to a very small segment of our corporate society?
I mean, it's an interesting question, isn't it? We are largely numb as a human population to the urgency and the reality of the fact that our Earth, our life support system, is literally on the verge of ecological collapse. We're currently experiencing a period of mass extinction. Rainforests are disappearing at a phenomenal rate. The ice caps are melting. We've overfished the oceans to the point where most feedstocks are collapsing. 40% of the Earth's surface is covered in cattle, and we've all heard these facts time and time again. But that sense of urgency that we actually need to do something is still sort of lacking in business sectors. And we've watched 2 decades worth of international politicians achieving nothing, no meaningful progress whatsoever, apart from avoidance of any legally binding targets. So we can't look to our political leaders or even leaders in the most business sectors to create this change. And so I'm really passionate and very clear that every person listening to this podcast, every person in their daily lives, every person with influence on decision making in their businesses, we have to do this now.
And look, and Meat Free Monday
Yeah.
is something that we ask a lot of our clients to do. And it's such a simple thing. It's just, just don't eat meat once a week. I mean, my dad was a meat and 2 veg every single meal. He was from Leeds, and it was amazing. But you go down to the CO2 emissions, but the impact of having meat free on one day is actually enormous, and the benefits to your health, let alone anything else.
Yeah.
So
We've talked about waste, we've talked about fuel, we've talked about, food is again, from an event perspective, you've got people on site for days. It's an opportunity to influence habits and educate, kind of thing. But food's a huge kind of a part of the carbon footprint of our human race, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the issue that nobody wants to talk about, really. Some studies have suggested that perhaps 50% of total greenhouse gas emissions globally is from the cattle industry, from agribusiness. So that's cattle themselves, the methane, that's the processes to produce the feedstock for it, the manufacturing, the transport. Whether it's 50% or not, it's a significant carbon impact. We talk about carbon. Actually, what we should be talking about is greenhouse gases, which is the basket of 6 greenhouse gases put forward under the Kyoto Protocol as how we measure global warming potential. The issue, of course, with cattle industry particularly is that methane, which is 20 times more potent in terms of the warming effect in the atmosphere and immediate. Meat is a huge issue. I just come back from a couple of weeks ago from ADE Green, and there was some inspiring presentations, one of which was from a woman called Stephanie, who manages Tollwood. It's a fairly mainstream event. It's city centre based. 1 million people attend this as day visitors, and they did an experiment. This is in Bavaria, where people like their meat. But there were 2 main food courts. One of the food courts, she decided to go vegetarian and almost vegan. She certainly didn't tell people that, because the tent would have been empty. But what she found was that because they were very careful in terms of the quality of the offer, and they weren't making a point of it being vegetarian, that actually it did as well financially as the meat tent. And people were saying, were discovering and were making different choices about what they were going to eat that day. They were discovering foods they didn't normally eat, and actually the response was very positive.
Mm-hmm. So it's as I understand it, food is not something that is generally considered at a sporting event, at a music event particularly. It's not on the agenda really, that I've seen to date.
No, it's not.
At Shambhala, we've worked with our food supply chain quite intensively. We want to know where the meat, the dairy, the fish particularly, is coming from. And we found that concessions and traders are very willing to work with us. And in terms of making changes, what we've done is stated an intention and worked with people over 3 years, made clear what our goals were, and instead of imposing immediate changes, we've kind of worked with suppliers over these 3 years generally, and been very successful. And with the exception of cooperating in one food standard agency prosecution around misrepresentation of where meat was coming from, we found that a lot of our suppliers are very willing to improve the provenance, improve the quality, adopt fair trade and organic certifications along the way.
Yeah.
Do you use the Red Tractor scheme? Do you use the it's MSI for fish, isn't it? Do you use different standards that you can equate to? Larger catering companies like Compass all put in particular standards like that.
Yeah, I find certifications difficult. The Soil Association Organic is robust and meaningful, or considered by most to be so. Fair trade seems to be fairly robust, but there's literally hundreds of mimic certifications which certify to different standards, and things like the Red Tractor, well, even a lot of free range certifications for eggs, they're not really worth their salt. It's actually a marketing exercise by the industry to wriggle out of genuinely robust standards. So I mean, it's a minefield, certification, but there are a few that are genuinely robust, in my opinion.
I mean, certainly, yeah, as you say, sort of when you've got a sporting event where there's a lot of corporate hospitality on board, Compass or Sodexo, whoever is cooking, they're not here in the room, but I'm sure they're very aware of the efforts, and I've certainly been aware going to sporting events that it's locally sourced.
Yeah, I've seen a change in the fact that the supply chain are now talking about it, and it's becoming a part of the contract.
Yeah.
To win that contract, you have to have, and I agree with you that there are lots of standards that you could get a lot better.
A lot of people out there, when they even start thinking about reducing their carbon footprint or the environment, they think, what's it going to cost us? Time and money. It's going to be more expensive. We're going to, it's kind of, and can we afford it? It's what would your response be to that? Say, Will?
It should be cost efficient. We class ourselves as an environmental management consultancy because you reduce your energy, you reduce your cost. You reduce your environmental impact, you reduce your cost.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting journey for us as a group in terms of powerful thinking, because how are we most effective as an advocate and provider of resources in terms of sort of an agent of change? And you have choices. Do you appeal to people's altruism? Do you appeal to people's brand integrity? Do you appeal to the audiences, the festival clients, or do you make the cost case? And invariably, you have to sort of work with all of those. Sometimes we can make the cost case with energy. Often you can make the cost case, not always. In other areas of sustainability, we find it more difficult to make the cost case.
And then it becomes and if it becomes back to the all the more philosophical argument, then, doesn't it? It's if we don't pay for that, what is the ultimate cost? And that brings it back to why you guys are doing this. It's that kind of it is that passion versus cynicism kind of thing, isn't it? There's a lot of people out there going,
I guess it depends on the size, doesn't it? It really does depend on the size. The larger you are, the more cost efficient it is.
It's and I think it's kind of with the events marketplace, music and sport, they can play a very important kind of role, if you like, in changing people's mindsets in wider society. As you say, was it 3.1 million visitors to summer festivals? It's kind of, how do you feel? Is it that passion that clearly you two have both got, and that is there in the industry to help educate people and get those habits into them?
I'm hugely excited by the potential role that festivals can play. We have captive audiences. Our audiences absolutely love the experiences we have. We have the opportunity to inspire people, and for those 3 days we have the opportunity to normalise and give people a very positive experience of living in a slightly different way. Now, I'm not personally an advocate that every festival in this country should suddenly become a green activist, but I think that by embedding good practice in our organisations and talking about the way we do things and continuing to provide creative and musical inspiring experiences, people carry ideas which are going to help us move towards a positive future away with them from our events. And I think that the role we can play is quite profound there in society. I think we can punch much bigger than our weight in terms of behaviour change than larger industries.
Yeah. But similar with sport, I guess, isn't it? You've got very much a lot of people having a very positive experience watching something they want to be part of, and
except the nice thing about festivals is that you could almost be more wacky in your behaviour change. You've got more of the out of the box thinking of, well, let's just do this because it'll get people thinking in this way. With a sporting event, it is quite corporate, and it is very much, you've got a particular standard you've got to adhere to because your client wants you to have that exact red carpet or that exact green carpet. So
there is an element of that. I mean, but interestingly, one of the other areas that has significant carbon impact on with any event is the transport. How you get in your 140,000 people in and out of the Ryder Cup or your bigger festivals, as you say, and it's kind of. From what I saw at something like the Ryder Cup, there were a lot of people who were parking their BMWs and getting on double-decker buses who probably haven't been on a bus for God knows how long. In all seriousness, you're changing people's habits and going, hey, we're going to put 50 odd people on the bus at a time to get you in and out efficiently, and it's saved having a 5-mile trail of cars with their engines going, so it's that kind of, and likewise for festivals, it's how people get there and back is very important, isn't it, Chris?
We find that for a typical festival, if you look at the carbon impact, well, first of all, we generally look at the on-site or operational impacts when we're considering a carbon footprint. So that's everything that the organisation, the festival itself, is directly responsible for in terms of what happens on that site. That does include supply chain in terms of transport, contractor transport, supply. But if you look at the extended footprint in geek language, or the festival-related impacts, we find that for a typical festival, 70% will be travel, audience travel, and 30% will be the festival itself. So it's certainly an area of significance that we can influence.
And it is that if people get used to car sharing, get used to getting on buses, to think, and actually being encouraged to do it, I think that you can, which you can do through price breaks, or there's all sorts of ways that an organisation, or just, hey, we ain't got a car park, you're getting on a bus 15 miles away, and that's going to,
because of that 70% of carbon footprint, are festivals chosen geographically, or do you think there will be a move to, right, we'll move this festival, so Shambhala, to a more transport friendly hub, so that, I mean, I don't know, I was just thinking about what you were saying.
I think currently that wouldn't be the primary motivator of site choice, but I think, obviously the role of transport varies. Like Reading and Leeds, for instance, is more city-based, and they will receive, and it's a younger demographic, they'll receive the majority of their audience through public transport, so they've got a great footprint. A more rural festival will have a more significant transport emissions footprint. But Glastonbury is a fantastic example, because they've, since 2011, I think, they've run the Green Travellers scheme, and I believe, don't quote me on this, that now more than 50% of the entire audience of Glastonbury arrive not in private cars, which for a festival of that scale, which is rural, is a fantastic achievement.
We've just been gate crashed. No. Very good. Yeah. No, it is a fantastic achievement. So I think, as I said, the organisers can do a lot to if the transport management is
if you sat in that queue for Glastonbury, though, you wouldn't want us to do it again.
Speaking from experience, there, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. I'm thinking we're kind of going to wrap things up fairly shortly, but I don't know whether there's anything else in particular that.
In terms of transport, we have recognised the significance of transport emissions through co-founding a project, an initiative called Energy Revolution. And the idea is that at point of sale, the audience is able to balance, we don't say offset, we don't think that's sort of scientifically correct, are able to balance their travel emissions by making a small donation toward the project. The project is focused on investing into renewable energy. So what we're saying is priority one is always reducing impacts, but for unavoidable impacts, there is something positive we can do. We can actively take part in changing our national and international infrastructure from fossil-based to renewable, which absolutely needs to happen. All the UN reports are saying that this is imperative.
Yeah.
So that's been launched by 10 festivals last year and is reaching out and engaging with audiences around this issue. But we're also talking to the supply chain and to artist representatives about how we might work with those constituencies to tackle travel impacts.
And those donations are going to go to non-renewable energy. That's a renewable energy creation.
Yeah, what we're doing is creating, effectively crowdsourcing an investment fund in renewables. We're currently a company with charitable objectives and registering with the Charities Commission to be a charity. And so, yeah, it's a specific festival industry project which hopes to work with audiences, artists, and supply chain to recognise travel impacts and do something positive about it.
Sure. Yeah. From your side, Will, you're dealing with? We talked about the supply side of it, and you've also talked about, obviously, and we've seen sporting organisations being really responsible for they're aware of what they can do and make a difference, kind of thing. It's I mean, in kind of wrapping up, do you think there's a long way for the sports industry to go? And if you're a supplier in that sort of sector, whether it be sport or music, what would your advice be, sort of? For
the positive side of me would say that I think we're on a really good journey, and I think that we are quite environmental, but quite frankly, we've got an awfully long way to go. We can think about so many ways of reducing our impact through energy, through transport, and the way that we manage these sporting events, and the way that we design our tents. Why aren't we looking at the way that our tents are designed? What sort of air conditioning are we using? Do we need to have as much air conditioning? What about the throughput from air? Are we taking into the geographical locations into consideration? You know, there's so much more we could actually do, and I think we're just it's icing on the cake at the moment of reducing our waste, and I don't know, there is so much more we can do. So
if someone's out there and they're listening and they think, I want to get on board with this, whether it be an organizer or a supplier who's thinking, yeah, okay, I'd like to get this ISO standard and do my bit. How can you just tell the listeners how they can reach you both, and to get copies of your new report, or reach you for advice on ISO?
Yeah, just so come to our website, www.greenelement.co.uk, and contact details are on that, info@greenelement.co.uk. And I'll just give you as much information as I can in order to help you reduce your impact and implement an ISO 14001, 2012 one, be it what you want, but ultimately we'll help you reduce your impact.
Yeah, and
there's a wealth of free to use resources, case studies, a fuel tool if you want to have a look at how you compare to industry average in terms of how much fuel you use. The industry average is 0.6 litres per person per day, by the way.
You've got some great stats, Chris.
Oh God, my head's absolutely full of them. And there's the Power Behind Festivals guide, which is due for a revision in February. And as you say, most importantly at this stage, the show must go on. Report for download at www.powerful/thinking.org.uk.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Chris, Will, it's been a very engaging conversation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. and you're in such a lovely position to be able to almost drive much more of an impact. But I don't know, you touched upon organic. Can you feed everyone through organic? Is that, I mean, you know, you've got, I don't know, you know where I'm coming from on this, and there is a lot of arguments that say actually it shouldn't be organic, it should be just good quality. Happy meat is, I think, a term that's around at the moment.
Yeah.
And but I personally live to your standards. I actually do buy largely organic meat. I adhere to Soil Association. I also subscribe to it. You know, so but that I can afford to. So I don't know.
Yeah. No, it is that stuff, you know, and having kids and things that you think about it. You know, we've stopped eating sausages and processed meat and things like that now, and it's veggie sausages instead, and the kids are on board and they love it. And it's kind of, you know,
Start making your own sausages. Brilliant.
start making your own sausages.
Yeah, we make our own sausages, and it's in a proper, yeah, it's brilliant.
We're going to do another video on how to make your own sausages. Paul, okay?
I mean, it's complex and emotive, isn't it? Food.
Yeah,
I agree with
it
you,
is.
Will, that to know your suppliers,
I think that's it, isn't it?
to source locally, and to look at standards around animal welfare, and to look at the quality of your produce are all things that we should be focusing on.
I think that's a great place for us to wrap up and go down and get ourselves some food.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much, Will. It's been
Thanks
a
very
pleasure.
much for inviting
And
us.
Thank you,
let's,
Graham.
let's hope that we're sitting down in a year's time when you've got your 100 festivals signed up, Chris, and we can start seeing some differences being made.
Oh, I hope so.
Good luck. Good luck. Thank you very much. Happy with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
You know
we got
what?
we got some good information across there, gents.
I was so close to saying, I can't believe you're wearing the same T-shirt.
Week two.
Me too.
Oh,
Here we are in week 2.
That's why I started smiling at the beginning of it. I was like, I so want to say that, because let's face it, everyone's going to notice that I'm wearing the same shirt.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Good spot. Yeah.
I'll just stop recording now. But